Hello, it's Brad Laurie, or BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about all things Nervos. And to do that, we have one of the co-founders. His name is Kevin Wang. Kev, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Hey, Brad. Good to be here.
Likewise, mate. Now, obviously, you're a very busy man, so I am very honored that you have come on the channel. But Kev, Nervos is something that has top-tier recognition right around the world without trying to FOMO. We want to find out why today, what you stand for. The slogan is that you are a public permissionless blockchain system. Now, that system aspect is what I want to really explore and expand upon today with you. Can you comment firstly on just in a nutshell what Nervos really essentially stands for?
Yeah, so there are many different angles to explain Nervos, so we are like you said, public permissionless blockchain, and it's also a blockchain network, which means it's a layered approach. So on the bottom layer, we have something called the Nervos Common Knowledge Base, which is, you can think about it as a smart contract platform, but it's more preservation focused. And obviously we can talk about the details later.
Right.
And then on layer 2, or we call the generation layer, there can be many different systems to depend on what the trade-off is to support faster TPS and fidelity and all these more application specific concerns.
Okay, so clearly the layered aspect, I want to explore that further with you so we understand each of them. But it also, there's a reference to you being a network of interoperable protocols, not that single protocol we've seen in the past. So what does that also mean in the context of what you're building?
Yeah, so fundamentally, if you want to build a blockchain system, right? So we don't say one blockchain, but a blockchain system that's scalable. If you want to still keep it decentralized, right? Not to have just one server running everything, that wouldn't be, even you're running a blockchain software, but that's not really a blockchain network. So if you want to keep things decentralized, the way to scale that, a blockchain is to have multiple blockchains, right? So when you have multiple blockchains, then the question is, first of all, what are their roles that they play in the overall blockchain system, and also what are the interactive protocol that, in other words, how they relate to each other and how they interact. So all these are protocols you have to design in not just one blockchain, but a blockchain system or a blockchain network.
Got it. So we're going to look at that multi-asset focus, looking at how you built in this arguably robust system and the value add it brings. And speaking of value, let's discuss preservation. It's something that comes up consistently through your literature. So why preservation? What's the reference there? Why does it matter?
Yeah, so the way we look at blockchains, we put them broadly into two categories. So one is, the first category is a blockchain that's there to preserve, right? So this is the Bitcoin and the BTC token or asset. So where the dominant use case people use BTC is to preserve value. In other words, if I buy Bitcoin, I likely won't just use the Bitcoin network to do a payment, right? To pay for my coffee or transfer you, $10. But I buy some Bitcoin that I want to keep around, and who knows, maybe for 10, 20 years, maybe my native fiat currency is depreciating and there's some problem, then I want to use this to preserve my wealth. Right. Or for some people, maybe just want to buy Bitcoin so that I can have something to give to my children.
Right. So essentially in that respect, that utility is utilized in that sense of a vault to a bank, and the bank being the person themselves handling their own control, their own assets.
So that's the first bucket, right? It's the preserve value. And then there's the second bucket, which is to do transactions. And if you look at what's the difference fundamentally between these two categories, I would say the first category has the dimension of time, right? Whenever you say preservation-based, then there is a dimension of time element that's in there, right? In other words, you put in now and you put out somewhere much later, right? Whereas when you have transaction-based, that's the second bucket category. We have transaction-based systems. They're typically not about time, right? That means a transaction is immediate, it's instant. Then when I perform a transaction, once done, it's done. So these two, those two categories are what we feel are fundamentally, they're very different to reconcile with each other, right? The way they occupy resources are different. The way they optimize are different. So in our system, this is how we organize, like I said, the network of blockchains. So we have one blockchain that's purely focused on preserving value, and then so we can design the both architecture, the ledger structure, and the crypto economics to be, to have this dimension of time, just like in Bitcoin, because then even there's no transactions, even there's a very weak transaction throughput. The goal is not to prioritize for that, but the goal is to prioritize for the long-term sustainability and decentralization of the network.
Right.
And
now,
then for all these other ones, you can optimize for transactions.
Okay, so clearly you're trying to build upon those protocols, that Nakamoto protocol, those Nakamoto consensus concepts, so that you can address ease of access, immediate access for those who do want to globally transact. But more importantly, you also want to enable that utility to be built in to the long-term, value add of the whole design, of the whole purpose of what it can do for, those who participate in this ecosystem. Now, to do that, you have to have a multi-asset platform, not just that singular focus. So talk us through multi-asset. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so we can talk about single asset first, which is probably more, most people want to understand easier. And Bitcoin is a single asset blockchain network, right? Which means there's only one asset in this blockchain system, which is BTC. There's no other assets on Bitcoin natively. Right. Whereas for a platform like Ethereum, you have multiple assets, which means there's a native token, which is ETH, but you can also issue user-defined tokens, right? So there are standards, either ERC-20 standards, there's non-fungible token standards, and so they all allow you to issue assets. So Ethereum is a platform that can support all these assets on top of them. So in this case, when we talk about the Common Knowledge Base as also a multi-asset platform, it means we don't only support our own native token, but we also support any other user-defined tokens, or you can issue assets on us just like the way you can do it on Ethereum.
Right, and you raise a really good point there with the analogies of ERC-20 of the non-fungibles as well. But let's move it one step further into native tokens being built into another system, because obviously there's a narrative or a discussion being had right now into the value of a native token for their own operations, their own value. Are you also going to be able to support those native tokens that build out their own ecosystems utilizing your own suite of protocols?
Yeah, so I think what you're touching on is really like in this multi-asset platform scenario. What's the use case? What's the utility of the native token, right? And in particular, for people in the community, why would the native token have any value, right? Why would I hold your token? And so in most other, I would say probably all other multi-asset platforms other than Nervos that I'm aware of, the native token is used to pay for transactions, which means like for Ethereum, the native token is used to pay for gas, and the gas is a measurement of transaction computation complexity. So which means that the more demand there is on the blockchain to compute or transact, then in theory more people will hold ETH so that they are able to pay for these transactions.
Right.
But like I said, like we discussed earlier, right? So we are a more preservation-based, Common Knowledge Base is a more preservation-based blockchain, which means you have to design the crypto economics not relying on transactions, right? But relying on preservation demand. And this is important because you want to make sure that the system is sustainable, because in the future there are always more efficient blockchains that have more TPS, and anybody can create their own blockchain, being a fork. For example, there are many forks of BTC, of Bitcoin.
I think there's one every second. It seems to come out.
Yeah, it's too many. I mean, we can't count them right now. But they can probably give you better transaction efficiency, right? So in other words, if you just make the assumption that through the end of the time we're the only blockchain that can do X, right? In Bitcoin case, it's payment. Then it's probably not going to hold, right? So there are always going to be, if there's value to be made, then people will always make blockchains to capture part of the value.
Right, and it makes sense a lot in that instance because obviously now,
which means transactions always flow to the cheapest and most efficient system place, right? So which means we don't want to make our tokens designed for transactions because otherwise, the value just either they're going to be competed away or people will just hold other tokens and they only transact or only trade for our own native token what they need to transact, which is not.
And what's interesting too is arguably you would never have existed had Bitcoin and had Ethereum not existed prior, because what you've done, it seems, is you've melded the best of both worlds. So talk us through that. In your opinion, what are those assets that they bring that you've really tried to scrutinize, utilize, and build into a better system, arguably, to lead into the future? So you have that SOV model built into a smart platform, a smart contract platform that can be used.
Right. So, obviously we think Bitcoin is a pioneer, and then, we think Bitcoin is revolutionary and being a stored value system. It's mostly, if you actually look at how Bitcoin is utilized, you can see that I think the last time I saw more than 50%, which is more than half of the UTXOs in Bitcoin, hasn't moved for the entire year, right?
Okay.
So for that type of a system, you can't argue it's a transaction system because most people hold it just to park there, right?
Yep.
Haven't even touched.
Yep.
So for that, for that practical purpose, I will say it's succeeding as a store of value system. That's how people use it. For smart contract platforms. But on the other hand, Bitcoin only supports one asset, which is BTC. Right. On the other hand, you have smart contract platform like Ethereum and pretty much EOS and other platforms where you can have multiple assets. But the crypto economics is really not designed to be a perturbation-based system. The native token utility is always to pay for transactions. So if there's no transaction demand, then there's no reason to hold the native token, or native token don't have intrinsic value, right? And so we kind of take both the best of both worlds, and so we design a platform that can support the multiple assets, but we also design the crypto economics so that, and also the overall topology and architecture and not just crypto economics, so that it can be a store of value system.
Right.
And when you have a store of value multi-asset platform, you need to preserve not just the value of native token, you have to preserve the value of all other assets on the platform. And that's why it's very difficult to do. It's not easy to do.
And it's going to be interesting to see how you play out and evolve, because you are literally doing something that's not yet really been seen in this melding approach. And given that the SOV narrative is still a very, very popular sort of endeavor, it's something that people are literally doing and how they treat BTC, clearly you want to develop that in terms of fostering that belief in your own token in the future, proving that it can be something of value as an SOV.
Yeah, there has to be. So what we're arguing is that if you want to design a smart contract platform, if you want to be sustainable, right? Let me take a step back, right? So let's look at the payment scenario just as a case study, right? So payment networks, there are probably 1,000 payment networks. Like you said, every second there's one that's cloned or there's fork from Bitcoin. But there's only one network, which is the BTC Bitcoin network, that accrues significant value, right? So its value probably more than half of all, or more than half, probably 70% of all these combined.
It's also been around far longer as well, a decade long.
It's always around for the longest time, and it's more community supported. The reason people like to hold Bitcoin is because people believe that holding Bitcoin, has value. They can gain value not only when they transact it, but also when they don't transact, but just by holding it, which is kind of the definition of store of value over time, right? And so, in other words, just for practical reasons, when we look at what has succeeded, and that's that's the value tend to flow to the blockchain system that can provide that. And especially with the if your system can also, the intrinsic value of system can be increased from the sort of the value appreciation of your tokens, and we can talk about that too. There's a lot of depth to those questions, but so we want to design the system that can do that, that can be a good value capture, that can be the common knowledge base, which is the layer 1 protocol, can be a good security decentralization and value anchor of the entire system.
Sure, and I think you raise a great point in that you reference the BTC, and we could argue that is the old gold. Now, in that respect, are you the new gold? Because I think gold is a great reference point for the kind of evolution it had to go through historically. Clearly, BTC is doing something like that right now. So are you the new gold? Are you going to do something that's really moves beyond this, but still retains that sort of same valorization of an asset class?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There are two aspects to this, right? So one is that historically people use gold to preserve value, but only to preserve monetary value, right? So you don't, so gold is used as money and used as, jewelry, right? So the utility of gold is just money or jewelry, which means you could also melt your gold to build jewelry, right? So you can use it as well. And that's what BTC is, right? You can both just park it there, or if you really want to, use it for payments, you can also do that. So for our native token, for Nervos, we're more versatile, as in the native token can be used to preserve the network, and native token can be used to preserve not just monetary value, but you can say like a non-monetary value as well, like assets basically.
So it's more
right?
quintessential in that respect. You're evolving beyond.
Yeah, so it's more versatile. So in a way, it's more like a land, right? So in a way that it has its utility, but you can also build on top of it. So this land, you can build a shop on top. You can build a taco shop. You can build a skyscraper if you like. But the land is the place that supports these utilities, right?
And it's a good analogy too, because really we're talking the language of smart contracts there when it gives you the options of what you can do. And we can talk about that more. Let's explore this with regard to, the narrative of layers. We were talking about that before, but let's go a little bit deeper. What does it actually mean to be built upon layers? There's terms like client, servers, channel, etc. They are all relevant. Let's explore, though, how imperative this layered architecture is.
Yeah, so layered architecture, I mean, if you look at internet itself, internet is built on layers. It's built on divided on layers. And if you look at the blockchain network as well, we believe it should be also built on top of layers, on the layered architecture. The reason is when you design layered architecture, you don't have to optimize for everything. And it's one of the engineering principles that everything has trade-offs, right? So you can't just try to optimize everything and with no trade-offs. So with the layered approach, you basically optimize each layer for, to have each layer play a limited role, and you know exactly what to optimize for each layer. And that way, the system as a whole can take advantage of all these optimizations, but you don't try to put opposing forces in the same place, in other words.
And what does that do computationally as well? Does that also reduce some of the pressures on the ecosystem itself, because things are focused independently?
Yeah, so computationally, definitely, and also communications, right? So once you have a layered approach, which means you have computation happen off-chain, right? In other words, the validators or the miners, the nodes, don't have to be aware of every computation that happens in the entire network, right? So they only need to understand critical computations. So easy way to explain this is if you look at our real human society, we are basically operating like legally, or how we organize our society. It's basically in the layered approach, right? The court system is basically layers, right? So when we interact with each other, let's say we have contracts to bind our behaviors, that most of the time people just obey those contracts and things just go fine. And if things don't go well, then we can go to court. And but that's only a very small percentage of all transactions, right?
Right.
And then we have layers of court systems, right? Most disputes can be resolved in the lower court, unless you keep escalating, right? So that if you just have every single transaction has to be sent to a court to be notarized and to be to be validated.
It'll be an immense bottleneck.
Yeah, you just nobody can do anything. People can do very little things.
Sure. Now that makes a lot of sense.
That's the idea.
That makes a lot of sense, Kev, but let's explore this in the context of your trilemma. You have made it clear that you're trying to solve this problem, and how you go about that in addressing this, we really need to understand, especially with regard to security and storage. Yeah. How are you going to ensure that you can scale as well by addressing this issue?
Yeah, so this is a perfect example. We can transition from the last topic. Is how you scale. It's basically don't burden the validators or the nodes with every single transaction, right? So you basically use a layered approach. You let normal transactions happen only on layer 2, which layer 2 can have many blockchains or channels in all their systems. And there you can have basically unlimited scalability, right? But you only bring the disputes, right? So you and me transact on layer 2, right? On a top layer or generation layer. But if we agree, then great. We don't have to bother the blockchain. If we don't agree, we'll bring those critical disagreement as transactions on the native platform, on the layer 1 protocol, to resolve the disputes. Right.
Sure.
So that, with it, on the other hand, from a game theory point of view, if you knew that a fair court system exists, then people don't just arbitrarily try to take advantage of each other, right? To try to, because there will be consequences if you get caught or you get put into prison, for example.
Right. But
that's
how again, let's move across that to the discussion of security, because I do want to understand that better. Now, that's part of that tripartite system. You have to have that outstanding security that's reflected in BTC and the Nakamoto protocol itself. So how can we ensure that you can still have that beautiful security built into your system, but also have that challenge that BTC had, which was that scalability, melding the two worlds so that we can really move beyond some of those inefficiencies that we still see plague the BTC framework?
Yeah, so I think BTC actually, you can division payment channels or Lightning Network as a layer 2 for BTC, right? So even in the BTC ecosystem, they're already thinking along this direction, which is basically BTC plus Lightning as layer 2, right? However, the reason why Lightning has been adoption the progress of Lightning has been very slow. I mean, the concept probably first brought up, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's longer than that. It's been a long time ago. But really, I mean, the progress hasn't been that fast. And the reason is because BTC's scripting system is not ideal, right? There's limitation in Bitcoin script that how much you can support, and that's the reason why it's been slow for Lightning. So we adopt the same philosophy of BTC, but we have a more advanced scripting capabilities, right? A Turing complete scripting VM and engine. And then you can support multiple assets, not just BTC itself, but multiple assets on top.
Right, and let's explore that now. I mean, you have your own VM as well, your own virtual machine. That is something that I've always said is not common for a lot of architects. They often ride on the backs of other VMs. You've developed your own. How important has that been, Kev, to have that built-in system rather than a bolted-on model that you often see when other startups want to utilize? For example, Ethereum has its own. So they often just tap into that. A big deal to have your own VM.
Yeah, it is. Again, when you evaluate our choices, you have to put into context of the bigger picture, right? What we're trying to achieve, and how do we trying to play. So the reason that we have, so our VM right now, we don't have a better name for it. We just call it CKB-VM.
Right.
So the reason we have a custom VM is because, and we built it from scratch, is because when you see this layer one system play only like a court, we call crypto court, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of all different layer two systems, there are some critical functionality you have to support. You have to, when you design, you have to keep in mind. So first is, now there are many different blockchains or systems that are building different, that have different type of consensus and different type of proofs. So when you try to read this proof, you want to make sure it's very easy to run other to run other VM on top of your VM. So put it simply, right? And you also want to make sure that you can support many different crypto libraries. So these are the reason, without knowing what they are, right? Because in the future, people come up with many new crypto approaches and libraries, algorithms. So we believe only a low-level VM can support those use cases, those goals.
Right.
So
and
that
also,
people can compile their own to, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, with regard to that, you also code as well. The VM supports a multitude of code, a multitude of languages. So can you tell us a bit more about that in that context?
Yeah, it's a low-level VM. It's actually, the VM itself is a simulator of RISC-V computer.
Mm-hmm.
RISC-V is an open standard instruction set, right? So it's basically a bunch of industry players that they want to build this agreed standard so they can build open source CPUs on top of it. So put it that way, right?
Right.
So our VM is basically a simulator of that standard. So once you have that, it's very low level, which means any programming languages, as long as they can run on computers with a RISC-V architecture, then they will be able to compile onto and run on the VM with very high efficiency.
That's going to be so important for adoption. That leads into it, because that low level, it almost suggests sort of a low standard, but it's actually the opposite. It's the access point that is the imperative here. Low level means higher degrees of access, more freer access.
Yeah. So the toolchain, any programming language that supports, for example, the GCC toolchain, LVM toolchain, it's very easy to port. You can just compile down to, the instruction set up for VM. So there's a lot of support for these, for these toolchain.
Got it. Now, what about SDKs?
Right.
What about SDKs, APIs, and all that sort of stuff? Have you built in suites of tools that people can utilize to better develop?
Yes, we are, and we definitely will make the life of developers very easy.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest advantage is that they can just use any existing libraries, and a lot of them are built in C. A lot of them are built in Golang and Rust and so on, and they can just compile them down directly into executable code in our VM instead of having to write their own.
Okay.
Which is the case for most systems like Ethereum, because they have to use Solidity to implement those libraries.
Yes, and I think that's another important point, because you're not precluding all of these developers worldwide, because they all have, much like languages of the world that we're speaking now, it's exactly the same analogy in that you're opening up the globe. You're breaking down those literal borders so that you can have a more interactive system that is more interoperable by design. Now, to do it, underneath everything is consensus. Everything hinges on the quality of that. Initially, you had a hybrid consensus concept. You've changed that. Tell us why and what your consensus currently is.
Yeah. So initially, the hybrid consensus is really a hybrid of POW consensus, if you will. The more academically correct way to say that is Nakamoto consensus. Mm-hmm. Which is basically the Bitcoin's consensus, right? Which means the longest chain contains the canonical state of the system.
Yeah.
And then we can layer BFT on that as a fast layer to process like happy cases. Mm-hmm. But right now, even having a hybrid consensus, you want to start with the POW or Nakamoto consensus, Bitcoin like Nakamoto consensus. Mm-hmm. And the reason is it's it's the best way to bootstrap the system. It's the best way to distribute tokens. It's the best way to come up with a community so that people have opportunity to do mining and hold your tokens, all without basically anybody can join.
Right. It sounds like you're betting
machine.
on. Sorry to interrupt again, but it sounds like you're betting on the truly probabilistic and proven nature of the Bitcoin consensus itself, of the Nakamoto protocol, because it's already shown it can work. So you're not necessarily building something new to start off with. But is it fair to say that whilst you're using that POW and that Nakamoto consensus model, you will indeed develop this into a more sophisticated consensus design?
Yeah, I mean, so right now we're going to start with the proof of work, and then we expect proof of work to be there for a long term. Mm-hmm. And the reason is it's not just Nakamoto consensus. We call this NC max, which means Nakamoto consensus maximum, mm-hmm. which means we optimize Nakamoto consensus to fully utilize the bandwidth. Right. Okay. So you basically monitor the fork rate, and then you want to target a specific fork rate. So if there's no fork at all, that means you're wasting bandwidth. Right. So the consensus then can self-adjust, and the block time can increase to fully, which kind of equivalent to increase the block size.
Okay. So you optimize the original protocol.
Yeah, we optimize the original protocol and. To again fully utilize the bandwidth, because ultimately, I mean, if you look at any other blockchain that has a very high TPS claim, mm-hmm. right? The bottleneck is, and we're like any other system, the bottleneck is going to be on bandwidth ultimately, mm-hmm. And especially when you put this into a real world, not just all the nodes are running on Amazon AWS, right? Web services. So if you put it in the real world, then the bottleneck is the network. So to the extent you can optimize on the network is how you can truly optimize the consensus protocol.
Sure.
And which is the case for most proof of stake and all these systems. A lot of systems claim like thousands or tens of thousands or even more TPS, but the trick is just look at the network topology and look at the network configuration when they make those claims.
Right. Well, it's good to hear that you have built that system, and it's great to hear that you're developing on what is already proven. I think that's what people really need, because trust is mm-hmm. fundamental for supporting any of these ecosystems, because they're putting their money into supporting utilities. And we'll harp back into that question of utility later. But let's now explore once again the code with regard to accessibility. Is it something that is available right now? Can people go and utilize access the GitHub in its full and complete code structure? Can we see everything there? Yes,
it's open source. It's actually been open source for almost half a year now.
Okay.
And it's on GitHub. Anybody can go to the Nervos Network account and see all the code that we put out there. And you can clone the repository and write your node yourself today. That should work. And again, this is not the first blockchain-related project that we have built as the team. Mm-hmm. And everything else we have built in the past, it's always been open source.
Right. Well, let's talk about that for a moment. You mentioned this is not your first. So how can we trust you can do this well? Talk us through what you've done before. Have you done another project before as a team?
Yeah, so our team has built the most influential open source crypto exchange and open source version of crypto exchange. And some of our co-founders work for a crypto exchange called Yunbi in the past, and it was briefly number one of the world for some time.
Okay.
And this is because Yunbi is the first exchange that introduced ETH, the listed Ethereum.
Right. Okay.
Basically. And so that got the volume of trading very, very high for some time.
So your team's been around for some time as well in blockchain.
Yeah, so our team has been around for some time. I mean, we're basically founders of Yunbi. We built a crypto exchange. We built one of the largest Ethereum wallets called mToken. Mm-hmm. One of our co-founders is past CTO of mToken. we built a permission blockchain called Theta, and we built one of the mining pools, one of the largest mining pools in the Ethereum community. And also one of our co-founders, also one of the core developers of Ethereum, it's a researcher in Ethereum.
Yes, I did see that, and that was quite impressive. There's a strong Ethereum engineering background for many of them. Are you going to be able to utilize all those skills though, Kev? Can you confirm that you're drawing on the best of what you have to build this for the long term? Because if you've had other projects that in the past, what's to say this won't be one of many in the the string of projects that you endeavor to pursue? How can we be assured that Nervos is one to stay?
I think it comes down to, when you look at all these different types of products, right? Public blockchain or public permissionless blockchains, it's a very different type of infrastructure to build. Mm-hmm. And it's built to, what we are hoping is we're building something that can last generations and even more than that, right? So we'll leave something for this world that can be on us. And for that, it's probably you can't. This is something can be achieved by probably a crypto exchange, right? So those will evolve, and it can be achieved by, for example, a wallet. Mm-hmm. But a truly innovative and unique layer one blockchain protocol, we think it will be, that could be our legacy.
Right. Basically. So really you're competing at the highest level of trying to be what is in the future going to be a legacy system, one in which it's one of those very few that are designed essentially to cater for the entire ecosystem of cryptocurrencies, the entire ecosystem of smart contracts. You want to move one of those at the top of an elite players that are providing for a conduit of access, a utility of access.
Yeah. So if you look
that's quite optimistic.
Yeah, if you look at, the layer one protocol is called Common Knowledge Base, right? So common knowledge is probably the highest level abstraction of value or anything that you can have. Because value fundamentally in this world, connected world, value fundamentally is data. Data is value, right? So those are two are interchangeable. And if you melt data and trust, what you have is called common knowledge, right? So which basically means the data that I know you know, and you know that I know that you know, right? And so on, and go so on. So that is the highest abstraction that you can have. So to be able to properly design a state-based model for common knowledge base, we think is the highest value that you can have.
I think that's a great point, and it's something that is quite novel. Now, to do this successfully, probably the most important part of the entire design is your crypto economics. You stress it, you have a paper, my understanding is available or coming. Now, it can't be stressed enough that this is proven, it's clear to the public. Talk us through, Kev, how we can be assured that your utility design correlates with your ecosystem. We alluded to this before with BTC, for example, with SOV. Mm-hmm. How can we be sure this model can actually work, and what sets it apart from, again, Ethereum, where we see that gas model play out?
Yeah, so again, we can start with Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Mm-hmm. So again, just transition from what we just said, common knowledge base or common knowledge. Yeah. Then in Bitcoin, if you look at from this lens, Bitcoin only has one asset. The common knowledge is about the value, the number of Bitcoin I own, and the number of Bitcoin you own. That everybody in the world can trust the security of the blockchain to know that I own 10 Bitcoin. And when I transfer you 1 Bitcoin, everybody will know I have 9 left, right? So they will reject if I try to send 10 to you again. So that's type of common knowledge in Bitcoin. But again, the limitation is it can only express one thing, which is value or monetary value, right? But if we can broaden this to all different assets, all different type of data and crypto proofs, when we talk about this layer of core systems, then what you pass around is basically cryptographic proofs. Right. So all these are a form of common knowledge, right? Then for all these common knowledge, you want to play together. That if you want to preserve them, so first of all, they're not just there to be transacted. So we want to build a system so you can preserve this common knowledge for longer, so that over time anybody can look at this and know what common knowledge is there in this blockchain,
Right.
so that so people can trust and transact. Now, like I said earlier, whenever you think about preservation instead of transactions, you have to come up with a crypto economic model that has dimension of time, right? So that they can be over time, it can be sustainable and secure.
And
So,
also, very importantly, to be fair, growing value. Now, you can't say that,
yes.
but I can, because that is the design I think it's meant to be put forward with the preservation model.
Yes. So increasing the value. I mean, we look at it as from a protocol designer, is the security budget of the blockchain there has to be a way to increase the security budget of the blockchain. When we say security budget, for example, in Bitcoin, that would mean the aggregate income of all the miners.
Right.
That is the security budget of the blockchain itself, right? So as a multi-asset platform, if you want to make sure that as the asset values on the platform grow, that you can provide corresponding adequate protection of these assets, right? So in other words, right, as a country become richer, the military also can grow with the wealth of a nation. You have to be able to grow the military, because otherwise your neighbor can invade you and then take all your wealth.
So the native assets can grow in value as the ecosystem grows.
Right. Right. Only if the native asset value grows, the security budget can grow, right? Because the issuance has a fixed schedule. Right. So at any point, we can point that year and say, well, there's going to be this many tokens that are going to be mined out by the miners. Then how do you increase the security budget, right? So you have to be able to have a way so the native token can appreciate as your ecosystem grows, so that the security will grow.
Got it.
Right? And then also, if you want to complete this loop, your use case or the positioning of the blockchain or the intrinsic value of the blockchain has to also increase as it's more secure. Right? So that will give you a positive feedback loop. So which means the more secure you are, then the more useful you are, then the more adoption there will be towards your blockchain.
Sure.
And then your native token has to be able to capture the value of the ecosystem value, and then which consequently will increase the security budget and therefore increase, let's say, for POW, the hash rate of the
right. So clearly, when we're talking about security, we're talking about the integrity being maintained. We're talking about trusting the system. We're not talking about security in more the legalistic frame or in that economic frame. And I want to make that clear, because you are a utility design. Now, in that context, let's move across to SEC determinations with regard to, let's say, Ethereum and BTC. It's important because you're in that camp. They've deemed them commodities. They made it very clear legally that they are not securities. Are you confident that you're going to lead into the same, the same camp? You're going to be something most likely deemed to have that utility-centric nature and thus be accepted as such?
Yeah. So there are two dimensions to answer the question. So first of all, the way we design our crypto economics, right, our tokens, native tokens, it's that it will have intrinsic utility, right, which is basically to be able to, you can use it to preserve your assets and values.
Right.
And also, the other dimension of this is we are working with, some of the very best Silicon Valley law firms to be able to make sure that we're very conservative in terms of what we say in terms of how the governance structure is, and we want to make sure this is eventually going to be a community-driven project. So we definitely take this very seriously.
Sure, and I appreciate that, because obviously compliance and legals, they always make CEOs uncomfortable, or co-founders, and I know no doubt that is the case. But globally, obviously compliance is a big focus of your team, making sure that you fulfill the requirements of all the different jurisdictions. That's difficult in itself. It's very convoluted. Are you exploring them? Are you doing your due diligence? Are you making sure that you appease the powers that be as you build out this new system?
Yeah, I mean, so it's definitely something we keep monitoring the situation. And again, we're working with some of the best legal professionals. When we say we, as mean the foundation, the governance structure of the project, that we want to make sure that we do things right. Again, for us, this is not about making money quickly and then pump and dump so that we become rich ourselves. But again, we want to make sure that we build a system that can last.
Right. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, Kev. Now, I want to ask you a tough question. Satoshi, no one really knows who he is. Some claim they know. We won't go there today. But what's the value add of anonymity anyway? I mean, clearly, I could be talking to the next Satoshi right now by talking to you. Let's be real. So, why have you come out so publicly when we've seen the value or the anonymity be so espoused in the beginning? So such an attractive feature of those initial maximalists. You clearly aren't upholding that. So, why are you so transparent? Why are you leading so publicly?
I think a lot of the reason is because what we're trying to build is, if you look at pretty much smart contract system, it requires a lot of resources to build. And, it's very difficult to it's very difficult to be like one person team, and then you would build this in your spare time, and then after a couple of years it will be there. So it's a much more complicated system than, for example, I'm just talking about engineering efforts, right, than Bitcoin, for example. Then so we believe that our governance structure give us this opportunity to we are never hiding the fact that we raised private funding. I think it's very necessary at this point to be able to put all the resources to work and bootstrap the system. And then again, our long-term plan is to give this back to the community. But in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of work that has to be done.
Got it.
And so we need to use that more sort of
traditional model, in a sense.
Traditional model, established structure to to have the resources that we need, and then to have a more closer collaboration between engineers, for example, to really put a lot of work into this and build it out.
Right. It actually makes me wonder, Kev, if Bitcoin, or if the BTC initial designers would have done something like this, had they had the opportunity and the foresight or the fortitude and the opportunity to see what would play out, whether they would have built something like this, because that's been one of the hindrances possibly to their development, because they haven't had that transparency of a core team. Then they've adopted Blockstream, and that's built out. Now, you mentioned something important. You're not hiding about it. You're not hiding behind the fact that you raised. My understanding is close to 30 million, about 28 million last year. Let's be really clear about the numbers and the lockup and everything, so people who can trust where that money is.
Yeah, so we raised 28 millions from mostly traditional VC investors and some crypto specific investors as well. We also have more, not your typical sort of crypto investors, but more like ecosystem investors, which means we know they will be able to support us after we launch.
Right, so you're talking about pro-utility investors. That's important. I'm sorry to interject, but you're talking about pro-utility investors who actually give a shit about your utility, not just want to invest to pump and dump you. That's what you're really saying. Yeah,
correct. So we were actually very picky in terms of picking investors. So we we ask exactly why they believe in the system, and then how they plan to support us. Not just the money, because when we raise funding, we got a lot of interest. So we had the luxury of being picky at that point.
I think that's really impressive, in considering well, Kev, because it was the bull market at the time, you didn't really raise the exorbitant amounts of money you could have. You could have raised hundreds of millions, most likely. So you didn't raise that. You raised 28. And why was it that number? And what does it actually mean for you? Have you cashed that out? And are there lockups for those terms? Sorry, there's lots of questions, but we're looking for
So we have lockups. So all the investors have lockups, and all the team members also have lockups. Just to give confidence to the community. and the team.
Are
for
we talking
example,
several years?
Yeah, the team lockup is 4 years, so
Wow.
all of us are locked up for 4 years.
That's a long time.
And yeah, and we don't mind it because, you know, again, this is something we want to commit for long term, and you know, we basically had zero resistance from you know, all the people in the team.
Right.
It's I think, and this is actually probably only afterwards, by hindsight, when we talk to people were impressed, but I think that's really the way it should be. And
it
I think
also
it's
fits the traditional
commitment.
model as well. When we see Series A, B, C rounds, for example,
Correct.
it's stock standard that these are up to a decade-long waits. You know,
Yeah.
by sheer consistency in the way they played out. So you're really not changing that model at all. You're in fact sort of embodying more of that traditional system rather than that quick buck nature we see now. That quick pump to maximize value and move on to something else. We see is playing out quite a lot.
Yeah, this is the only way, you know, to really able to build a community and say, hey, you know, we invite everybody to build on top of with us, and then, you know, be our ecosystem and be our partners. Then we have to be able to show people that we ourselves are committed.
Right.
And the best way to show that is to set the lockups.
Got it. So where's the money now, Kev? Have you cashed out, and have you got a strong runway for the next few years?
Yeah, we're pretty good in terms of management of our money, and we cash out pretty much very quickly after we raised, and then so we kind of dodge a bullet there. So we're mostly all in fiat. So we still have a pretty comfortable runway in terms of supporting the development of the protocol.
That's good to hear, because we need to know you can afford your team and you can grow your team, and we need to know that you can do that for the long term, because obviously the whole point of your open source protocol is to provide that protocol for applications, for use and for development. So how are you going to develop revenue for yourself once this runs out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you know, our job, we as in the team and the founders, we see ourselves, the role we're giving ourselves, it's the ones that bootstrap the network, right? So, which can take actually a long time, can take years. So we want to make sure that we use this funding that we raised to accelerate the development and the growth of the network. But there will be a point where you know, we can transition this more to a community-based governance structure, and at that point, so the way we look at it is very simple, right? Is Nervos Network is successful after, you know, many years, then we're really not afraid of not having a job. I think there are many things that we can do.
So essentially it's designed to truly move into that distributed frame so that it starts to become more organically architected and run. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
And then you gradually graduate to more of a, you know, a shadow position, you know, more in the back side of the.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to fade away at that point. So.
Wow. So you're not going to be building enterprise services and products. You're not going to be building your own smart contract systems, or will you build something else at that point to try and create some, you know, some revenue for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we're like actively thinking right now. Because again, you know, right now we're fully committed just building this, and it's a ton of work already.
Right. Well, it's really interesting. It's really interesting, Kev, because clearly all of your team going to be quite wealthy if this plays out anyway. So they'll have some sort of, you know, support for themselves if this becomes one of those main primary asset classes that lead into that whole commodity era. You know, that move into that commodity conversation in crypto, where you're not just simply, you know, one of those onboarding platforms. You're literally leading it as a layer one. So I think that's fair to say, because if the crypto economics stand true, there will be significant value in this token.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the only way to succeed as a project, right? So you have to be able to design. In a way, I feel like there's a lot of discussions in new consensus design in terms of the, you know, TPS, but there hasn't been really a lot of innovations or discussions in crypto economics of all blockchain systems. But the way I look at it, it's actually as important, if not more important, in consensus design or architecture and, you know, every other topic. because eventually, it's a machinery that have to be able to run on its own. And to be able to achieve that, you have to design the incentives so that when people behave for their own interest, it will contribute to the growth of the whole network. Right. So that we can sort of fade away, like we said.
Got it.
Can run itself.
Sure. Now, clearly, the partners agree. The parties that supported you mentioned that there was some non-crypto, there was traditional, and even those that were in the crypto sector, they were top tier in terms of what they stand by and what they can prove. Now, some of them were Polychain, Sequoia. You also have China Merchant Bank. All of those are big players and have a lot of respect, command a lot of attention, and the serious eye and ear from various sectors. Why do you think they did choose to support you though? Why did they want? What's the reasoning? What's the value add for you with these partnerships?
Yeah. So why did they choose us? I think when we did fundraising last year, I think there were two reasons. One is the team, and then we'll have what we have done in the past and what we have delivered. I think that definitely got everybody's attention. And the other is just what we were trying to do, like we have just talked about, right? So we have Bitcoin, and we can see that Bitcoin is becoming store of value, but it's very narrow sense, just monetary value. And we see all other smart contract platforms can do transactions, can support a much larger use case, but then they can't be simultaneously a store value system.
Got it. So they really
and that's why we
what you're doing. Let me flip it on its other side though. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to get through everything.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of time with you. I know you're busy.
No.
Now, the China Merchant Bank, important to raise here because obviously you saw that they can offer services, they can offer connections that are of value to you as an ecosystem. But in China right now, there's a suggestion that it's anti-crypto and it's pro-blockchain. Now, we've had some discussions, you and I, just in prep for this interview. Clearly, it's not just that simple. Can you talk us through that and also why it is important to have these kinds of parties from China involved in this kind of initial support?
Yeah, so I would say for a lot of people that haven't been to China and then don't know the local ecosystem very well, there's actually a very vibrant blockchain ecosystem in general and crypto ecosystem in China. And then, there's obviously a lot of projects, but obviously we think we are one of the top ones. Right. And there are a lot of fans, a lot of interests. Now, what are, the Chinese government has banned or disallowed ICOs, right? So which basically means you can't just do ICO and then sell directly to Chinese investors. But in terms of just supporting a protocol and be able to hold tokens and then be able to utilize a blockchain and building apps and building dApps on top of it. So all those are not banned.
Okay, now that's really
for your second question.
So crypto is not simply something we can blanket say is banned. It's
correct.
Okay, in China, you can't say that. That's really important because people have that misunderstanding.
Yeah, there's actually a large community. There's a lot of events happening in China. There's a lot of conferences. We also run one of the largest developer communities in China. And, just in past a few months, we got somewhere between, I think, over 50 meetups already, just in China and in various cities. So yeah, there's a lot of interests and a lot of people want to learn and want to participate.
Right. And that's a big deal about the developers you mentioned and those meetups. 50 is a lot just in one country. Some projects don't even do 50 globally. So I wanted to talk more about that. People just don't know how prevalent and how permeating your Nervos system is in China. So just give us some examples because clearly it's very widespread already.
So how do I say? So I think in general, I can say we are very well received in China. And I think a big reason is if you look at several the aspects of the design itself, there are many innovations that so in other words, we're not just cloning some other people's code base, and you will find that in many projects.
Yeah.
Or
Yes,
just
a
tweak a
lot.
little bit, right, in the larger protocol. So we are actually designed based on first principles, and then we have a very we know what we're trying to do, we know who we want to be, and we have a lot of innovative designs around those. I think that tend to be more well received. And also just if you look at our team, we're like the old folks in the crypto circle in China, basically.
Right.
Again, we have
so you've been around,
much,
you know all the connections.
Around. We've been the block for a long time, and pretty much the Bitcoin days, and before Ethereum launched, and when Ethereum launched, we're like on the we're on the forefront of that.
So do you know Vitalik?
So yeah, so
do you know Vitalik? I mean, have you ever had a conversation with him? I mean, obviously this is interesting because you're again at that top echelon of startups trying to do something, that really does change the game.
Yeah, I know what you're trying to get at this, but obviously, some of us have met him and talked to him, but I don't want to just throw his name into
conversation
to prove that we somehow to prove anything. I think
it was more to
he knows a lot of people.
Is he aware of what you're doing?
A lot of people know him.
It's more just to suggest, is he aware of what you're doing? Because he should be, given that you're trying to be a multi-asset system that takes it one step further.
I think many people are aware of what we're trying to do.
Right. Which is,
so, we all like him, and then, he's done a lot. He's great in everything. And he's really, outstanding. And in terms of his knowledge and, his contribution and everything. Mm-hmm. So I don't just want to put his name and.
No, I totally understand. Now, let's talk about your roadmap for a moment. Let's go there. Now, testnet is the buzzword. You're going to build this in phases. You're going to stress test it. You're going to make sure that developers really check the code thoroughly. What's the plan leading from now until Q4?
Yeah, so we're going to release testnet soon. And so testnet is going to be 2Q. And after that, we're going to do basically once you have testnet, you want to invite people to download the code and run a node and test it. Mm-hmm. And then we'll just look at how it goes. So if everything goes well, after a few months, we should be able to launch mainnet. Mm-hmm. And so this is where we want to collaborate with the community and then hear everybody's experience and have a way to people to report bugs and to come with the community and then talk to partners. So all these things are sort of in the pipeline that we're trying to do. When the code is ready and then, beta tested and, we're going to have, for example, security audit firms to look at our code and, make sure everything's okay.
Right.
And then, we're going to make sure that mining works. We're going to try that in the last phase of testnet.
Great. What we like to hear in this instance, Kev, is that you're taking the time, you're doing the things the right way so that each phase of the testnet is proven. It's, you've extrapolated all the different aspects, you debug parts of it if there's anything. Clearly, this is a year-long process until you get to that mainnet in Q4. So now the tough question, and you're not going to like it, and that is with regard to what's going to happen with regard to TGEs or listings. Most CEOs or co-founders, they don't want to talk about it, but it is a question I always ask.
I can comment directly on those. Mm-hmm. So, I can only say that those things are basically the plan is the plan for those is not announced yet.
Okay, I appreciate that. Now, I won't push you. I know that you don't want to disclose those things right now because you're planning them out. But clearly the reality is at some point you will take the exchanges seriously and there will be action taken. And then can we also confirm with you, is the term TGE still relevant to Nervos? Is it something that is still in the mindset of your roadmap and plan?
Yes. So put it this way, right? So another way to answer your question, it's really about how we build community, how we support, how we reward our early supporters. And I think it's very important to have a community, and then to have people that recognize the project and want to support the project early, to be able to, basically have tokens. And then we're taking that very seriously. It's just the landscape of, a lot of things are happening, and then we're still looking at all things.
Got it.
And yeah.
Especially given that when we've seen BTC play out, it didn't do these kinds of things. It just organically flourished. And that's why I think you're being so tentative. That's my supposition anyway, because you want to make sure that it is organic. You want to make sure clearly that this is going to be something that is upheld by the community, that literally are the bedrock, really, when it comes to support. They are the ones that will drive Nervos forward. So I appreciate your honesty about that. I'm looking forward to finding out more transparency about the exchanges, about the TGE. And also I wanted to ask you quickly, IEO, does it mean anything to you?
I know what it means.
Okay, well, it just refers to an initial exchange offerings. It's this new concept of ICO, essentially on exchanges. Does it mean anything to you?
Again, we're looking at everything, and we're keeping everything open. But nothing is really.
Appreciate it. Nice and safe for you, Kev. Now, to finish off, mate, I want to firstly say thank you very much, sincerely, for all those who want to know more about what Nervos is doing. You're clearly top tier in terms of what you want to do. There's not many trying to tackle this challenge of melding Ethereum and BTC bits when it comes to philosophical and technological underpinnings. You're trying to capture that in a way that's novel. And it's going to be exciting to see this year play out as you move forward towards mainnet. Now, to access more, where can people go in your socials, in your community, to learn more, to converse more, to connect more?
I think joining our Telegram group is a good first step. For developers out there, they can also just go to our GitHub page, and its account is Nervos Network, and then you can look at our source code. Again, everything's open source, so they can clone it, they can run a node, they can play with it. But for other non-developers, probably the best way is to come to Telegram, where we'll have regular announcements.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin Wang, thank you very much, mate. You are the co-founder of Nervos. You are leading a network that is certainly going to create a lot of crypto conversations right now. Again, for more information, you can also go to Twitter, YouTube, you can go to Reddit, you can go to the blogs and the forum as well. But on behalf of all those in crypto who want to know more about innovative and novel blockchains, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a long interview, I know, and some of them have been challenging. So thanks for being brave on the blockchain and answering for the people. Mate, is there anything you'd like to say to finish off, to address to the people what you stand for, what your team stands for, and what you essentially are trying to build?
So I think you summarized it very well, Brad. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll just end it here.
Absolutely, mate. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I wish you all the very best.
Okay. All right, Brad. Talk to you then. Bye.
See you, mate.